So, what if depression isn't what we've always been told it is? Not a character flaw or even just a simple chemical imbalance. What if we've been looking at it completely backwards? Today, we're going to dive into a pretty radical new idea that depression is actually a biological survival strategy. Let me tell you about a man named Lao Zhang. This is the first thing he noticed. It wasn't sadness exactly, and it wasn't despair. It was this deep physical weight. His body just wouldn't listen to his mind's commands anymore. And for a lot of people, this is really where it starts. A kind of cellular exhaustion that you just can't explain away.
And this leads us to a really powerful question. What if that feeling of being completely shut down isn't a failure? What if it's your brain's last-ditch effort to protect itself when it thinks it's about to run out of energy?
Now, thinking about it this way, well, it reframes everything. We stop seeing a person as broken, and instead we see a system that has very deliberately powered down to conserve what little resources it has left. It's not a malfunction, it's a protective function, even if it feels awful. This new paradigm just completely flips the script. We go from talking about depression as some kind of flaw that needs to be fixed to understanding it as a survival strategy that's being driven by a real energy crisis in the body. It's a huge shift from trying to fix a broken part to instead nurturing a depleted system back to health. So why on earth would the brain decide to do something so drastic? Well, it all comes down to its energy budget. Your brain is an incredibly high-energy organ, and if its supply chain gets disrupted, it will go into a radical conservation mode. And there are three major bottlenecks where this can all go wrong. Okay, first up, imagine the brain's energy supply is like a city's power grid. The pipes, our tiny blood vessels, can get blocked. If you have poor microcirculation, the basic fuels like oxygen and glucose can't even get to the neurons that desperately need them. The resources are technically there, they just can't be delivered. Second, even if the fuel does arrive, the factory itself might be inefficient. I'm talking about our mitochondria. These are the tiny little power plants inside all of our cells. If they become dysfunctional, they can't convert that fuel into usable energy. So now the raw materials are just piling up, but the production line is completely failing. And third, what if the entrance to the factory is locked? This is exactly what happens with insulin resistance. Glucose, which is the brain's main fuel source, is just floating around right outside the cell, but it can't get in. And this creates this incredibly cruel paradox. The brain is literally starving in the midst of plenty. When these kinds of bottlenecks happen, the brain really has no other choice but to power down. Okay, so a temporary shutdown is one thing, but what happens when this energy crisis goes on, becoming chronic? Well, this is where the system starts to move from a temporary protective state to one that can actually cause lasting change. Think about it like a computer. In the beginning, it's kind of like your computer going into safe mode. It's just a software glitch, right? It's a functional change, a temporary drop in power that's totally reversible with a reboot. But if you force that system to keep running in safe mode for too long, it can lead to actual hardware damage. We're talking structural changes like the loss of neural connections that are much, much harder to fix. And this progression, it happens on a pretty slippery slope. It starts with that functional shutdown to save energy. But if the stress becomes chronic, that energy deficit is just constant. Eventually, the system gets so desperate that it starts to sacrifice its own hardware. Neurons can atrophy, and really important brain areas like the hippocampus can actually shrink. This is the biological price of sustained burnout. So if the problem is a system shutdown, then the solution, it's not to force it back on. You can't just yell at it to work harder. The real solution is to create the conditions for a safe, gentle reboot. It's about getting to the root causes of that energy crisis in the first place. We can think about this path to reboot in four main parts. First, you have to restart the energy supply. That means reducing the system's internal drain and giving it the right fuel. Second, you got to get those pipelines flowing again with gentle movement to restore circulation. Third, and this is so important, you have to reset the signals. The system needs to receive all clear messages to feel safe enough to come out of its defensive crouch. And finally, you have to repair the environment the brain is living in. Things like managing inflammation and supporting your gut are a huge part of that. So all of this brings us to a really fundamental shift in how we can approach recovery. This isn't about a battle of willpower. It's about creating an internal environment where the body feels safe and feels like it has enough resources again.
What this means is you can't just command a system that's in shutdown to turn back on. You can't bully it. The goal of any really effective approach is to gently persuade the system, on a deep biological level, that the danger has passed, that it's finally safe to come back online and get back to normal operations.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Instead of constantly asking, how can I fight this feeling, or how do I fix what's broken in me, maybe the more powerful question is the one you see right here. How can we start listening to our body's signals and actually nurturing our system so it never has to resort to such a drastic shutdown in the first place?